When the district's highest-ranking government officer, Bhumi Sharma's mother, wearing ordinary clothes, went to a government bank to withdraw money, all the bank officials assumed she was a poor woman or a beggar. No one knew that this woman was actually the mother of the district's top officer, DM Madam Bhumi Sharma. Everyone thought she must be some beggar. What is she doing in such a professional bank? The woman slowly walked toward the counter. There a security guard named Rashma was sitting. The elderly woman said to Rashma, "Daughter, I need to withdraw some money from the bank. Here, take this check." Rashma, without even looking at the check, said, "How dare you enter this bank? This bank is not for people like you. Are you a beggar? This is a bank for rich people. Only big personalities have accounts here. A woman like you could never afford to have an account here. Leave immediately, otherwise I'll throw you out." The woman said, "Daughter, please just look at the check. I need to withdraw 500,000 taka." Hearing this, Rashma got even angrier. "Do you think this is a place for jokes? You think I'll believe whatever you say? Someone like you having 500,000 taka? Have you even seen that much money in your life? Leave this place right now or I'll drag you out myself." Just then, the bank manager stepped out of his cabin and asked, "Who's making all this noise?" Rashma immediately replied, "Sir, it's a beggar woman who just won't leave." The bank manager, furious, came outside and without listening to a word, he slapped the elderly woman. The slap was so hard she staggered and fell to the ground. The manager then told Rashma, "What are you doing? Drag her out of here. Where do such people even come from?" Rashma then forcibly pushed the woman out of the bank. At that moment, all the customers and staff in the bank stood silently. No one knew that the woman was actually the mother of DM Sharma. And the entire incident was being recorded by the bank's CCTV cameras. Back home, the woman, crying, called her daughter Bhumi Sharma and told her everything, how she had been insulted and humiliated at the bank. Upon hearing this, Bhumi trembled inside. It was like being burned alive. She cried and said, "Ma, tomorrow I will go with you myself and we will withdraw your money together." The next morning, DM Bhumi Sharma wore a simple cotton sari and got ready to go to the bank with her mother. Mother and daughter embraced each other. Tears in their eyes, a mix of pride and pain. Tears welled up in Bhumi's mother's eyes. But there was also pride in her daughter. The daughter she had raised through so much hardship, educated her. And today she had reached such a high position. At exactly 11 a.m., mother and daughter reached the front of the bank. The bank hadn't opened yet, even though it was supposed to open at 10 a.m. Bhumi sat calmly next to the bank entrance and waited. A few minutes later, when the bank finally opened, mother and daughter entered. Their clothing was so simple that the customers and staff assumed they were just some rural women. No one could imagine that this was Bhumi Sharma, the district magistrate. Bhumi slowly walked toward the counter, holding her mother's hand. There sat Rashma, the same security guard from before. Bhumi politely said, "Madam, we need to withdraw some money. We need to buy medicine for my mother, and there are a few urgent tasks as well." Rashma looked them up and down from head to toe. One old woman in a sari and a young woman in simple clothes. They didn't look like officials in any way. Rashma mocked and said, "Oh, maybe you've come to the wrong bank by mistake. This branch is for high-profile clients." Bhumi smiled slightly and replied, "Madam, please check once. If it's not there, we'll leave." Rashma reluctantly took the check and said, "It'll take some time. Sit over there." Bhumi held her mother's hand and sat down in an empty chair in the corner. She gave her mother some water and remained quietly seated herself. People in the bank were staring at them strangely. Usually wealthy businessmen, officers, and influential people came here, wearing expensive watches and flashy clothes. Seeing the mother and daughter sitting there in simple attire seemed out of place to everyone. Whispers began to spread around. "Where are they from? Must be here for pension issues." They surely can't have an account here. Pumi heard everything, but she remained completely calm. Her mother felt a bit uneasy, but seeing her daughter's patience, she tried to compose herself. After a while, Pumi said to Rashma, "If you're busy, please arrange a meeting with the manager. I have something urgent to discuss." Rashma, annoyed, picked up the phone and called the manager's cabin. "Sir, a woman is here. She's saying she wants to see you. Shall I send her in?" The manager peeked through the glass window and saw an ordinarily looking woman sitting with another elderly lady. They didn't look like officers at all. In a cold tone, he replied, "I don't have time for such useless people. Let them sit there." Rashma said, "Please sit in the waiting chair. Sir will be free in a bit." Pumi said nothing. She just held her mother's hand and sat quietly with the dignity of an officer and the patience of a daughter. Pumi Sharma remained seated in complete composure. But seeing her mother's restlessness and hearing the murmurs around them, Pumi gently squeezed her mother's hand and said, "Ma, it seems like they don't care at all. Now I have to speak for myself." She slowly stood up, adjusted the edge of her sari, and walked straight toward the manager's cabin. The manager, who had seen them earlier from behind the window, now felt a little nervous. He quickly stepped out, stood in front of Pumi, and said, "Yes, what do you need?" Pumi held out an envelope and said, "I need to withdraw money. I need to buy my mother's medicine, and there are some other important matters too. Here, take this check and have a look." The manager didn't even take the envelope. In a condescending tone, he said, "When there's no money in the account, how can any transaction be done? You don't even have the means to have money in your account. Big dreams of withdrawing a huge amount." Still calmly, Pumi replied, "If you would kindly just check once, that would be better. It's not right to say such things based on assumptions." The manager laughed and said, "Brother, I've got so much experience. I can tell someone's status just by looking at their face. People like you come in here every day. You're nothing special. I don't believe there's anything in your account. And stop creating a scene. Look, everyone is watching you." The situation was getting tense. The manager said, "It would be best if you left now." Pumi Sharma's face was still composed, but the peace in her eyes had disappeared. In its place, a clear firmness was visible. She didn't say anything. She placed the papers inside the envelope on the table and said softly, "All right, I'm leaving, but one request. Please take a look at what's inside this envelope later. It might be useful to you." Saying this, she held her mother's hand and started walking toward the door. But just as she reached the door, she suddenly stopped and turned back. With a deep gaze toward the manager, she said, "Beta, you will have to face the consequences of this behavior. Time will teach you." The entire bank went silent for a moment. No shouting, no drama, just a respectful warning that felt like a sign of an approaching storm. The manager was a bit shaken and in a low voice said, "Old people say whatever they feel like. Let them go." He returned to his seat. The envelope still lay on the table, unopened, ignored. He had no idea that inside that envelope was a truth powerful enough to change his entire life. The next day, the usual routine resumed at the bank. Clerks were busy with their work. Cashiers were counting money, and the manager was back to his usual arrogant self. But today, there was a change. The same elderly lady who had been humiliated beyond limits the day before walked into the bank again. But this time, she wasn't alone. Beside her stood a confident, high-ranking official, dressed sharply, holding a polished briefcase. As they entered, every eye in the bank turned toward them. The elderly woman didn't look around. She walked straight toward the manager's cabin. At first, the manager didn't recognize her, but as she came closer, her face became clear. It was the same woman, the same one whose file he had thrown away the day before, the one he mocked because of her simple sari, the one he had ordered out saying, "We don't want clients like you." Now fear spread across his face. Terrified, the manager came out of his cabin on his own. Today, the woman's face held confidence and pride. She didn't stop. She went directly to the manager and said firmly, "Manager Sahab, I told you the other day, you would face the consequences of your behavior. You didn't just insult me. You insulted thousands of ordinary citizens like me. Now it's time for payback." The manager, now nervous, said, "Who are you to lecture me? Is this your house? This is a bank." The woman interrupted him midway with a smile and said, "Meet this gentleman. He's my legal advisor." Then in a calm tone, she added, "And I am the district magistrate of this area, DM Bhumi Sharma. And I also hold an 8% shareholder stake in this bank. And this dignified lady here is my mother, the one you mistreated so terribly." For a moment, silence filled the entire bank. All the staff, customers, even the security guard at the door stood in complete shock. The manager's face turned pale. Before he could say a word, Bhumi Sharma continued, "From this very moment, you are being removed from your position as bank manager. Your new posting will be in the field where you will report daily while working directly with ordinary citizens." Bhumi Sharma opened her briefcase and took out 2 documents. She placed them on the table. The first, the manager's transfer order. The second, a show cause notice stating, "Your behavior has been found to be in violation of the bank's policy guidelines." Now, the manager was drenched in sweat. With a trembling voice, he said, "Madam, I made a mistake. I am truly ashamed. I sincerely apologize from my heart for the words I said yesterday." Bhumi's eyes were still steady, but in her voice was the sense of justice that reflects the identity of a true officer. She said, "You are apologizing for a mistake. But did you insult only me or also those countless ordinary customers who walk in with gray hair and simple clothes whom you judge only by their appearance? Have you ever read the bank's guidelines? It's clearly written. Every customer is equal. No one is rich or poor here. If any employee shows discriminatory behavior, strict action will be taken against them." She paused for a moment, then said in a firmer tone, "If I wanted, I could have suspended you today, but I'm giving you one chance to correct yourself. Next time it won't be your name. Your entire identity will be erased." Then she called the bank security guard, Rashma. Rashma came forward trembling in fear, tears in her eyes. With shaking hands, she said, "Madam, please forgive me. I made a terrible mistake. In the future, I will never judge anyone like this again." Bhumi Sharma looked at her and said, "Never judge someone by their clothes. Let today's lesson stay with you forever." By then, the entire bank staff stood with their heads lowered. Bhumi looked around at everyone and said, "It's not the path. It's the mindset that makes someone great. A person who understands humanity is the true officer." Saying this, Bhumi Sharma held her mother's hand and walked out of the bank. Inside the bank for a few moments, silence returned once again. Then slowly, everyone started looking at one another. Their mindset had changed. From that day onward, the environment of the bank transformed. Every customer began to receive respect. No one was called poor just because they wore a sari. Everyone understood. Never underestimate an ordinary person because one day that very person might stand before you as someone special. This story teaches a deep lesson. In many places, people judge others by their clothes, status, or position. But this story teaches never to look down on someone because of their appearance or simplicity. That person might hold a position far higher than you or be more honorable. Every person deserves equal respect. Whether rich or poor, treating everyone humanely is true humanity. That is the spirit that builds nations. As for the bank manager, his life took a different turn. Transferred to a remote village, he now had to manage operations where every single visitor looked like the woman he once mistreated. He came to understand their struggles, their simplicity, their dignity. He no longer had a glass door separating him from the people. Every day, he met mothers who walked miles for their pensions, elderly men who counted coins to deposit, and young girls trying to save money for school. Each one taught him humility. Rashma too changed. She was no longer the harsh, dismissive guard at the door. She became known for her kindness. She greeted every visitor with respect. "Aap Kais Hain," she would ask the elderly. "What can I do for you today?" She would smile at the laborers. Her apology wasn't just words. She lived it through her actions. Meanwhile, Bhumi Sharma continued to lead with strength and compassion. She made it her mission to enforce dignity and equality at every public institution. She visited hospitals and schools unannounced, talked to workers and villagers, listened without filters. Her mother became her inspiration, her quiet reminder of where she came from and what values mattered most. Word about the incident spread across government departments and media houses. News channels ran the story of the district magistrate who exposed arrogance and uplifted justice. Citizens felt proud. Many said, "At least one officer truly stands for the people." Students wrote essays about her. Teachers shared her story in morning assemblies. And officers in other departments started treating people with more respect. One day, in a school auditorium filled with young girls, Bhumi was invited to speak. She wore the same cotton sari she wore that day at the bank. Her voice was calm but filled with conviction. Never let the world decide your worth by your clothes. Never be ashamed of simplicity. And never hesitate to raise your voice against injustice, not for revenge, but for change. A girl from the audience stood and asked, "Madam, how do you stay strong when people try to insult you?" Bhumi replied, "Strength doesn't come from power or position. It comes from truth, from standing beside your loved ones, and from never forgetting where you came from. That's what my mother taught me that day, without saying a word." The hall erupted in applause. Students felt empowered. Teachers felt inspired. Somewhere in the crowd, an elderly woman in a soft-colored sari wiped a tear from her eye and smiled. The story of DM Bhumi Sharma didn't end there. It began there. She became a symbol of courage wrapped in humility. Every time someone tried to belittle a poor person, someone would say, "Remember the bank story? Don't make the same mistake." And slowly, a culture of respect began to grow, one that didn't depend on labels or clothes, but on character. Greatness doesn't wear a tag. It walks barefoot, holds an old mother's hand, and changes the world with just one firm but respectful voice. Weeks passed since the incident at the bank, but its impact continued to ripple through the town like an unseen tide. People no longer saw the elderly as burdens, but as vessels of silent resilience. Clerks who once frowned at wrinkled hands now stood to greet them. Guards opened gates with warmth. Managers thought twice before judging appearances. And it wasn't just one bank that changed. The news had reached other institutions. A hospital administrator quietly arranged a training session about compassion. A post office officer started a drive to ensure elderly citizens received their dues without delay. Something invisible, yet powerful, had begun to shift. Bhumi Sharma didn't return to that bank again. She didn't need to. Her presence had etched a lesson in stone. But she continued her work, tirelessly and with purpose. Every morning, she rose before the sun, touched her mother's feet, and sipped the tea her mother brewed with love. Her sari was always simple, her demeanor always calm, but her resolve grew stronger with every passing day. One afternoon, she visited a village school where children sat cross-legged on dusty floors. The school had no benches, only broken slates and faded books. She sat down among them, her knees folding like theirs. She asked their names, their dreams, and smiled when a girl said she wanted to become a judge. "Why?" Bhumi asked gently. The girl replied, "Because judges are not afraid of anyone." Bhumi touched her head, tears rising. "Then you will be one," she said. "And remember, a true judge never wears fear, only fairness." That evening, while returning from the village, her car halted at a small tea stall. She asked the driver to wait and stepped out to stretch her legs. An old man with shaking hands was trying to pour tea into a chipped cup. As he spilled some, a few boys at a nearby table laughed. Bhumi walked up, took the cup from his hand, and served the tea herself. The boys went quiet. She turned to them and said softly, "His hands may shake, but he has served life far longer than you've known it. Respect is never wasted." No lecture followed. Just silence, and then lowered heads. That's how she taught, by example, not noise. Meanwhile, her mother became a quiet hero in their neighborhood. Women came to her with questions, children sat at her feet listening to her stories. She told them how strength doesn't always shout, it often comes dressed in a plain sari, with eyes full of patience and a voice that whispers truth. She shared how one moment of dignity can transform a lifetime of silence. One day, a letter arrived. It was from the bank's new manager, a young woman who had once interned under Bhumi. She wrote, "Madam, your actions helped me understand leadership not through policies, but through humanity. I now ensure every employee here undergoes empathy training. We don't just manage money, we serve people." Bhumi folded the letter and placed it in her diary, between pages filled with scribbled quotes and reminders in her own handwriting. On one page, it simply said, "Be strong. Be silent. Be seen." News reporters tried many times to interview her. They wanted headlines. But she declined gently each time. "If one story can change hearts, let that be enough. My face is not the story. The mother who waited quietly at the bank door, that is the story." Elsewhere, the former bank manager, now posted to a rural development branch, was learning his own lessons. He traveled by bus, sat under tin roofs with farmers, and listened more than he spoke. Once, an old woman handed him her thumbprint and asked for help filling a form. She said, "I can't read, son. You'll have to trust me." He filled it with care. That night, he sat in his room, staring at the stamp ink on his fingers. For the first time, he didn't feel important. He felt responsible. And that was a better feeling. Rashma, the security guard, was promoted months later. But before leaving, she started a mentorship group for new recruits. She taught them what she had learned painfully. "Don't look at the clothes," she told them. "Look at the eyes. That's where people's truth lives." And so, life moved on. Not with fanfare, but with quiet change. The kind that doesn't make noise in the streets but settles deep into the culture of a place. Bhumi's office became a place where villagers could come without fear. Her staff knew never to judge a visitor by the dust on their feet. Her mother, still calm, still wise, often watched from the veranda as people came and went, her heart warm with the knowledge that her struggle had not been in vain. Then one day, an invitation arrived from the state governor's office. Bhumi was to be honored with the Seva Medal for exceptional civil service. The ceremony would be televised. But when asked to send her biography, she kept it short. Daughter of a woman who walked into a bank with nothing but truth. At the ceremony, dignitaries clapped, garlands were laid, and speeches were read. When it was her turn to speak, she simply said, "This medal does not belong to me. It belongs to every mother who walks alone into a place that judges her worth by her appearance. Let this be a reminder, that justice doesn't begin in courtrooms. It begins at doorways, counters, and waiting chairs." Afterward, she returned home and placed the medal in her mother's hands. "For you," she said. "Because you taught me to walk without bending, and to speak without shouting." Her mother didn't say anything. She just hugged her daughter tight, her eyes closed, her heart full. As seasons changed, that story continued to spread. Teachers used it in moral science classes. Officers shared it during orientation. Mothers told it to daughters. And whenever someone was mistreated for looking poor, someone else would speak up and say, "Have you heard about DM Sharma and her mother?" Because some stories don't need repetition. They become part of the way a society breathes. They live in pauses, in glances, in the silence before someone judges. And they remind us all that the strongest person in the room is often the quietest one, walking in not with power, but with purpose. One rainy evening, months after the recognition ceremony, Pumi sat on her veranda watching the sky darken. Thunder rolled in the distance, and the wind carried with it the scent of wet earth and jasmine. Her mother sat beside her, knitting a shawl for a neighbor's baby. The silence between them was peaceful, filled with unspoken understanding. Suddenly, the phone rang inside the house. Pumi rose, wiped her hands on her sari, and answered. It was the chief secretary of the state. Madam Sharma, the central government is considering you for a national leadership program in administrative reform. Your name has been recommended not just for your integrity, but because of the way your story has reshaped how civil servants treat the common man. You'll be flown to the capital in 2 weeks for the orientation. Pumi thanked him politely and hung up. Her mother looked up from the yarn. What is it, Beta? Pumi smiled softly. It seems the government wants me to teach others what you taught me. Her mother chuckled. Teach them to sit quietly, speak with kindness, and wear cotton saris. Pumi laughed. Exactly that, Ma. Exactly that. The news spread quickly. Journalists came again. This time, Pumi allowed one interview on the condition that they also speak to her mother. Cameras rolled as the old woman, shy but proud, sat upright in her chair and answered every question with grace. When asked what message she had for young officers, she replied, "Don't be so busy serving rules that you forget to serve people. A rule without respect is a cage, not a law." The clip went viral. People across the country shared it. Schools screened it. A university named a lecture hall after her. But amidst all the recognition, Pumi remained grounded. Each morning she still prepared tea for her mother. She still met citizens without appointments. And every week, without fail, she visited the village where she and her mother had once been mistaken for beggars, where no one knew who they were. During one such visit, a young boy named Farhan caught her attention. He stood by the road with a broken sandal and a schoolbag heavier than his small shoulders. He offered her a cold glass of water from a mud pot without knowing who she was. Pumi knelt down and asked, "Why aren't you in school today?" The boy looked embarrassed. "They won't let me in until I pay the late fees." Pumi looked into his eyes and saw herself, the same resilience, the same quiet fire. That evening, she called the district education officer. By the next morning, not only was Farhan back in school, but a policy was passed that no student in that district would ever be barred due to unpaid fees. Schools would now have a compassion fund, seated by the local administration, for children in need. Pumi didn't announce it. She didn't take credit. But Farhan knew. He would carry that moment with him forever. Back at her office, letters continued to arrive. Not from officials, but from ordinary people. One said, "Because of you, my mother no longer hesitates to go to the bank alone." Another read, "I stood up for myself at the hospital because I remembered your story." And one simply said, "Thank you for making dignity normal again." Despite the admiration, there were challenges. Some within the system felt threatened by her quiet power. Bureaucrats who had long basked in hierarchy and silence now faced uncomfortable questions. But Pumi didn't argue. She responded only through action. When someone delayed pensions for weeks, she personally visited the office and processed the files. When a clerk insulted a sanitation worker, she made the clerk spend a day cleaning public toilets. She didn't need to shout. Her justice was quiet, swift, and unforgettable. Meanwhile, her mother's health began to waver. The long walks, the age, the quiet endurance, it all began to show. One night, as Pumi tucked her into bed, her mother said, "I never imagined I would live to see this. A world where truth doesn't get laughed out of the door." Pumi held her hand. "Ma, it's still just beginning. We have more to do. And she meant it. Because to Pumi, the true measure of her success was not medals or posts. It was the day no mother would feel the fear of being judged in a public place. The day no old woman would hesitate to walk into a bank. That was the country she wanted to help build. A few months later, during a national conference, Pumi stood before hundreds of top-level officers. She wore the same sari. Her mother's watch on her wrist. No makeup, no grandeur. Just presence. She spoke for 15 minutes. No fancy words. Just truth. I once walked into a bank holding my mother's hand. People saw our clothes, not our character. They saw status, not soul. That day, I learned how institutions fail not because of systems, but because of people. Let us not be those people. Let us be different. The room stood in applause. For many, it was not a speech. It was a mirror. Years passed. Pumi was eventually promoted to the Central Civil Services Board. Her name appeared in magazines and newspapers, often accompanied by phrases like, "the people's officer," or, "the silent reformer." But every time she was asked about her biggest achievement, she gave the same answer. The day my mother walked out of the bank with her head held high. And as her mother grew frail and began forgetting little things, one memory always stayed with her, the day her daughter held her hand and said, "Come, Ma, I will walk with you." Years later, the world had changed around them. Technology evolved, institutions modernized, and names in high offices rotated like seasons. But Pumi Sharma remained a name that didn't fade. She had never chased popularity, yet she had become a symbol. Her story, of a daughter standing up with quiet strength for her mother, was now taught in civil service academies across the country as part of empathy training. Young aspirants, eager to serve, studied her case not just for inspiration, but as a blueprint for character. Her mother, now mostly confined to a chair by the window, would smile faintly whenever visitors arrived. They didn't come to meet the officer. They came to meet the woman who changed everything by doing nothing but walking into a bank with dignity. Children from the neighborhood brought her flowers. Teachers brought her sweets. Officers who had once held ranks higher than her stood humbly before her chair. And she would always bless them with the same words, "Serve without pride. Speak without cruelty." Pumi never allowed her mother to feel forgotten. Every evening, she sat by her side and read letters from people whose lives had been touched. One letter came from a woman who had once worked as a janitor at a district court. It read, "Madam, after watching your interview, I gathered the courage to ask for my pension. They had ignored me for years. I quoted your words, 'Silence is not weakness, it is a test.' I was paid within a week. Thank you for giving me my voice." Reading these words, Pumi looked at her mother, tears shining in her eyes. Her mother, whose memory sometimes faltered, whispered, "Is that woman smiling now?" Pumi nodded, pressing her mother's hand. "Yes, Ma. Because of you." Meanwhile, in the capital, a new government initiative was launched. It was called Project Naman, designed to train public-facing staff across all institutions in humility, compassion, and service ethics. Pumi was asked to lead the founding council. When she stood at the first orientation, facing a hall filled with police officers, clerks, administrators, and support staff, she began not with rules or regulations, but a story. "I once met a man who was powerful," she began, "but he didn't know it. He had the power to make a woman feel respected. But he used it to shame her. I also met a woman who had nothing, no position, no fame, but when she walked with grace, the world changed. That woman was my mother. And I am here because of her." Her words echoed through the auditorium, not as rhetoric, but as truth. Officers who had worn stars on their shoulders for years sat straighter, humbled not by force, but by reflection. Some took notes. Others simply stared ahead, lost in thought, recalling every time they might have dismissed someone too quickly. Back home, her days were quieter, but never idle. When her mother could no longer walk to the garden, Pumi arranged to have flowers planted outside the window. Morning breezes carried their scent indoors. Her mother loved jasmine and marigold. And on days when her memory sharpened, she would ask, "Has the world changed, Beta?" And Pumi would smile. "A little, Ma. Because of what you taught without ever raising your voice." Then came a moment Pumi had prepared for, but never truly expected. One morning, as dawn stretched its light across the hills, her mother passed away, peacefully, in her sleep, her hands resting in her daughter's lap. There were no final words. No dramatic last breath. Just stillness. A stillness that shook the earth inside Pumi. The funeral was small, just as her mother would have wanted. No garlands of power, no speeches from dignitaries. Just neighbors, villagers, officers, and children, people who had known her not as the mother of a DM, but as the mother of quiet courage. They lit incense, laid white flowers, and stood in silence. The bank manager, now reformed and working in a social finance NGO, traveled from his city just to lay a single rose at her grave. "She changed my life," he whispered. After the rituals, Pumi sat alone on the steps of her house, holding a photograph of them taken years ago, the day they had walked out of the bank together, hands clasped, the sun behind them. That photograph would later be framed and placed in government offices as a reminder: never judge. Never assume. Always serve. Time moved forward. New officers came, new policies were written, and institutions changed faces. But in quiet rooms of training centers, a story would still be told, of a woman who walked into a bank and changed it forever. And of a daughter who never allowed that change to be forgotten. Even in her retirement, Pumi never truly left the service. She wrote a book, not about power, or politics, or administration, but about dignity. It was titled, Holding Her Hand. The first page read, "This is not a book about governance. It is a letter to every child who has seen their parent belittled, and every parent who stayed strong in silence. Let the world hear your quiet." The book became a national bestseller, translated into multiple languages. It was found in libraries, hospitals, banks, and even prisons. People read it not just to understand public systems, but to understand humanity. One day, a young officer posted in a remote district wrote to her, saying, "Madam, every time I feel frustrated, I think of your story. It helps me remember why I joined the service. To make my mother proud, just like you did." In her modest home, now turned into a learning center, Pumi smiled at these letters. She didn't miss the spotlight. She missed her mother's hands. But she found comfort in the fact that those hands had started a movement, one act of kindness at a time. And in some distant village, maybe a girl in a cotton dress walks into a government building, head high, eyes forward, no fear. And someone opens the door for her, not because they know who she is, but because they've been taught never to mistake simplicity for weakness. Years slipped by like pages in a gentle breeze, and yet the story of Pumi Sharma and her mother continued to grow, not just as a memory, but as a living echo in the minds of a new generation. Across villages, towns, and cities, the narrative had taken on a life of its own. It was no longer just a story, it had become a principle, an example, a quiet oath among those who wished to serve with honesty. In the hills of the north, a small community school had painted a mural on its wall. It showed a woman in a sari holding the hand of an older lady, walking past a bank. Children passed by it every day, asking their teachers, "Who are they?" And the teachers would smile, telling the story of how the strongest revolutions don't come with violence, but with unwavering dignity. Pumi, now older, with silver strands scattered through her hair, lived in quiet retirement. She refused all offers of security details, flashy cars, or grand titles. Her home was still the same. Clean, peaceful, filled with books, jasmine plants, and the soft hum of a spinning fan. Her neighbors still called her Madam out of respect, but she asked them all to use her name. "I was born Pumi," she would say, and that's more than enough. But even in her quiet days, she remained active in guiding new officers. On Sundays, she would open her home to any young civil servant who wished to learn. No formal lessons. Just shared stories over tea, discussions on ethics, and readings from her diaries. They called it the veranda sessions. And the most important lesson she always repeated was this: your badge doesn't protect the people. Your empathy does. One afternoon, a young woman named Ananya came to visit her. She had just cleared the civil services exam and had scored among the top 3 in the country. "Madam," she said, "I wanted you to be the first person I visited before I take up my post." Pumi looked at her, saw the same fire in her eyes that she once had. "Why did you want to join?" she asked. Ananya replied, "Because when I was 10, my grandmother was insulted at a hospital. She was told she didn't look like someone who deserved a government bed. And then, I read about you. About your mother. I decided I would never let that happen again." Pumi took her hand and smiled. "Then you will do well. Just remember, you are not there to dominate. You are there to serve. Let your strength be invisible and your kindness unforgettable." Ananya stayed for hours, soaking in the wisdom, the calmness, the way Pumi paused between thoughts. Before leaving, she asked, "Is there anything I should always carry with me, some advice I can hold close in difficult times?" Pumi nodded. "Carry silence. It's more powerful than shouting. When people mock you, be still. When you see injustice, act without drama. And when you meet someone who looks small to the world, treat them as if they're the most important person that day." Later that year, Ananya implemented her first major reform in a government clinic, ensuring elderly citizens had a separate help desk with trained empathetic staff. She named the initiative Ma Dignity Desk, and placed a photograph of Pumi's mother there, her soft eyes forever watching over those who needed gentle strength. Elsewhere, retired civil servants began writing about the values that had been lost and the hope that had been restored. Many credited Pumi for reminding them what the service was meant to be. She was often quoted in essays, books, and even parliamentary debates. A senior minister once said, "In times of division, her story is a compass pointing back to our shared humanity." Despite all this, Pumi remained unchanging. She still visited the local post office to send letters. Still took evening walks, greeting people with folded hands. Still kept her mother's shawl folded on the side of her armchair, as if she'd return any moment and ask, "What did you learn today?" One winter, as the air grew crisp and the skies turned soft with haze, a memorial event was held in the capital. They were unveiling a sculpture in honor of unsung heroes in public service. Pumi was invited, though she hadn't expected it. When she arrived, she found hundreds seated, quiet and reverent. The cover was lifted, revealing a sculpture of 2 women, one old, one younger, hand in hand, standing tall, facing forward. Beneath it, a single line engraved. "She walked in with truth." The world bowed in silence. As she stood before it, people clapped, cameras flashed, but Pumi looked only at the statue's eyes. Her own eyes misted. In her heart, she whispered, "Ma, look where we are now." That night, back at home, she lit a lamp for her mother and placed a jasmine flower beside it. Then she sat by the window, pen in hand, writing once again in her diary. The ink flowed slowly, steadily, every letter a memory, every word a promise. "Today," she wrote, "I saw 100 young eyes that reminded me of ours. I saw respect not taught in books but born in hearts. I saw what you believed in, alive, walking, changing the world. And I know now, you didn't just raise a daughter. You raised a future." The days that followed were soft, quiet, and full of reflection. Pumi no longer attended public functions or gave interviews. She had said all she needed to say, not through speeches, but through how she lived. The world around her had shifted, and she had given it the gentle push it needed. Now, she watched from the sidelines, content. She spent her mornings tending to the garden her mother once loved. The jasmine had bloomed in wild clusters now, reaching up the side walls of their modest home, filling the air with a sweet, nostalgic fragrance. Every time she passed by them, she felt her mother's presence, as though she'd walk out any moment from the back door, asking for her glasses or humming a forgotten song. Letters still came, stacked on the table beside her armchair. Some from children, thanking her for teaching their teachers. Others from bureaucrats, sharing stories of dignity restored in faraway districts. But most were simple. Handwritten. Spelling errors. Folded in half and smudged with fingerprints. The kind her mother would have cherished most. One such letter came from a girl in a remote desert village. Her name was Shaheen. She wrote, "Madam, I never met you. But I want to be like you. People here say a girl cannot be a government officer. They say we are meant to marry and stay home. But when I read about you and your mother, I saw myself. I wear old clothes. I walk barefoot to school. But now I feel brave. I will study. I will prove them wrong. I will be someone who listens and never shouts. Like you." Pumi held the letter to her heart. Her voice cracked as she read it aloud to the wind. "That's enough now, Ma. That's the legacy." One night, as winter deepened and the stars stretched quietly over the countryside, Pumi sat beside the oil lamp in her room, her mother's shawl draped over her shoulders. She looked at the faded photograph on the wall, the one where her mother smiled gently, her eyes filled with something eternal. She closed her eyes. And in the stillness, she remembered everything. The bank. The slap. The silence. The strength. Her mother's trembling voice asking only to be heard. Her own resolve that burned without noise. Every moment had led here, not to glory, but to peace. That night, she slept early. And she did not wake. The news broke the next morning. Across the country, people mourned, not with grand speeches or loud grief, but with the kind of reverence one reserves for those whose lives were a quiet revolution. The president issued a statement. Schools held silence for 2 minutes. Post offices hung her photo at their entrance. And in the bank where it had all begun, employees lit candles and placed a garland around her portrait. Rashma, now a senior officer in the same bank, stood at the gate welcoming elderly women with folded hands, tears in her eyes. Pumi was laid to rest beside her mother, under the old peepal tree in the courtyard where they used to sit on warm afternoons. The grave was marked with a simple stone. No grand title. No designation. Just her name, and one sentence. She walked with her mother. And made the world walk straighter. In the years to come, children would learn about her not from textbooks alone, but from the way people spoke her name. Officers would remember her when tempted by arrogance. Clerks would pause before dismissing a poor man's question. Guards would open gates with care. And somewhere, a little girl in a dusty village would tie her hair, open her notebook, and write on the first page. "I will walk like Pumi Sharma." The story ended. But its footsteps never stopped echoing.